Hey, tonight we're diving into something different. Not the history you learned in school with its famous battles and military conquests, but the history that actually shaped daily life for billions of people. The quiet revolutions, the anonymous innovations, the cultural shifts that transformed humanity without a single sword being drawn. You know, when you think about history class, what do you remember? Probably dates of wars, names of generals, territories conquered and lost. 1066, Battle of Hastings. 1776, American Revolution. 1914, World War I begins. We memorize these moments as if they're the only things that mattered, as if human progress is measured primarily in bloodshed and territorial gains. But here's what they don't tell you. While those battles raged, while kings and generals planned their campaigns, and historians recorded the dramatic clashes, something far more revolutionary was happening in the background. In quiet workshops and cluttered laboratories, in fields and studies and hospitals, ordinary people were making discoveries and creating innovations that would transform human life far more profoundly than any military campaign ever could. The teacher who first taught you about the printing press probably spent more time on the 100 Years' War. The textbook that mentioned antibiotics devoted 20 pages to World War II battles and maybe 2 paragraphs to penicillin. We learn the names of every general who fought at Gettysburg, but can't name the person who invented the polio vaccine without looking it up. This isn't just an oversight. It's a fundamental misunderstanding of what actually drives human progress. It's a bias toward the dramatic over the consequential, the violent over the creative, the destructive over the constructive. Tonight, we're correcting that imbalance. We're going to explore the real history, the one that actually matters to your daily life. The history of people who saved millions of lives you'll never know existed. The history of innovations so fundamental you can't imagine life without them. The history of quiet courage that changed the world more effectively than any army. If you're enjoying these deep dives into forgotten history, I'd really appreciate a quick like or subscribe. It helps more than you know. Drop a comment with where you're listening from. I love seeing our community connect through these untold stories. Now settle in, dim the lights, and let's explore the history that textbooks forgot. The history without battles or wars. Congratulations! You've just been transported to 15th century Florence, Italy. Not to witness a battle or political coup, but to experience something far more revolutionary. The quiet birth of double-entry bookkeeping. I can hear you already. Bookkeeping? Are you serious? I thought we were talking about revolutionary history. Yes, bookkeeping. And trust me, this is more revolutionary than you can possibly imagine. You're standing in a merchant's counting house in 1494. The room smells of ink, parchment, and candle wax. Franciscan friar Luca Pacioli is explaining his system to a group of skeptical merchants who've been tracking their business the old way for decades. The old way is chaos. Imagine trying to run a business when you're not entirely sure how much money you have, who owes you what, or whether you're actually making a profit. Merchants keep notes, sure. Lists of transactions, records of debts, inventories of goods. But it's all scattered, incomplete, impossible to reconcile. You might know you bought wool for 50 florins and sold cloth for 75 florins, but factoring in all your other expenses, all your other transactions, your investments, your debts, that's guesswork. Most merchants operate on instinct and rough estimates. They succeed or fail based partly on business acumen, but largely on luck. They can't analyze what's working and what isn't because they can't see the complete picture of their finances. It's like trying to navigate by the stars when half of them are hidden by clouds. Pacioli's system changes everything. Every transaction recorded twice, once as a debit, once as a credit. Assets, liabilities, equity, revenue, expenses, all tracked systematically. The two sides must always balance. If they don't, you know immediately that there's an error somewhere. Sounds boring? This innovation, developed by Franciscan friar Luca Pacioli in 1494, would reshape global commerce and enable the rise of capitalism more profoundly than any military conquest ever could. Watch what happens. A merchant can now see, clearly and completely, the state of his business at any moment. Is he profitable? Which ventures are succeeding? Which partners are reliable? What's his cash situation? All these questions, previously answered with educated guesses, now have definite answers. The psychological shift is profound. Business moves from an activity based on intuition and luck to one based on data and analysis. Merchants can make informed decisions. They can identify problems before they become catastrophic. They can plan for the future with actual information rather than hope. But the implications extend far beyond individual businesses. Double-entry bookkeeping makes possible entirely new forms of economic organization. Consider the joint stock company. Before reliable accounting, how could multiple investors pool their money and track their individual shares of profit and loss? How could they ensure managers weren't stealing? How could they even know if the venture was succeeding? Double-entry bookkeeping provides the infrastructure for this. It allows strangers to invest together in enterprises too large for any individual, with transparent accounting protecting everyone's interests. The Dutch East India Company, founded in 1602, becomes the world's first publicly traded company. It raises capital from thousands of investors, operates across continents, and generates wealth that transforms the Netherlands into a global power. None of this would be possible without the accounting systems that let investors trust that their money is being tracked properly. The insurance industry emerges for similar reasons. How can you run an insurance company if you can't accurately track premiums collected, claims paid, and reserves needed? Double-entry bookkeeping provides the tools to manage risk mathematically rather than intuitively. Banking systems that operate across continents require reliable accounting. When a merchant in Florence wants to transfer money to a partner in London, both parties need confidence that the transaction will be recorded accurately in both locations. Double-entry bookkeeping, with its built-in error checking, provides that confidence. International trade explodes because merchants can track complex transactions involving multiple currencies, credit arrangements, and partnerships across time and distance. Letters of credit, bills of exchange, all the financial instruments that lubricate international commerce rest on the foundation of reliable accounting. Think about what this enables. The age of exploration happens partly because accounting systems allow investors to fund risky voyages with some confidence they'll be able to track returns. The Industrial Revolution requires capital formation on unprecedented scales, possible only with accounting systems that let investors monitor their investments. Modern corporations, stock markets, banking systems, even your retirement account, all rest on principles Pacioli articulated more than 500 years ago. No soldiers died for this innovation, no territories were conquered, yet it transformed human civilization as dramatically as any war ever fought. The pen, it turns out, really was mightier than the sword, at least when recording debits and credits. As you stand in that Florentine counting house, surrounded by merchants hunched over their ledgers, carefully entering each transaction twice, you realize something profound. History's most consequential moments often occur in silence, in workshops, laboratories, fields, and studies where individuals make discoveries or create systems that quietly reshape how billions of humans live. The merchants don't realize they're participants in a revolution. They're just trying to track their business more effectively. But their adoption of double-entry bookkeeping will ripple through history, enabling economic developments that reshape the world more profoundly than the countless wars happening simultaneously across Europe. One of those merchants, Giovanni, has been using the old single-entry method for 30 years. He's skeptical. Why write everything twice? It's double the work. But Pacioli shows him how the system catches errors, how it reveals the true state of his business, how it helps him make better decisions. Within months, Giovanni is a convert. His business becomes more profitable, not because he's working harder, but because he can see clearly what's working and what isn't. This is how real revolutions happen. Not with dramatic announcements and military parades, but with practical tools that solve real problems. People adopt them not because they're forced to, but because they work. And slowly, incrementally, the world changes. Let's jump forward to 1796 in rural Gloucestershire, England. You're about to witness another battle-free revolution, one that would save more lives than all the wars in history had claimed. Edward Jenner, a country doctor, is about to perform the first vaccination. The scene is unremarkable. A small cottage in the English countryside, a frightened 8-year-old boy named James Phipps, and Dr. Jenner holding a lancet. Outside, it's a typical May morning. Birds singing, farm animals making their usual sounds, the smell of grass and wildflowers drifting through the window. Nothing suggests this moment will change history. But Edward Jenner has been thinking about smallpox for years, obsessing over it, really. Smallpox is one of humanity's ancient enemies, a disease that's been killing and disfiguring people for thousands of years. By the 18th century, it kills 400,000 Europeans annually. 30% of those who contract it die. Survivors are often left blind or covered in disfiguring scars. Everyone lives in fear of smallpox. You can be healthy at breakfast and covered in pustules by dinner. The disease doesn't discriminate. It kills rich and poor, young and old, strong and weak. European royalty falls to it. In 1774, King Louis XV of France dies of smallpox. His successor, Louis XVI, is so terrified of the disease that he refuses to visit sick people. Jenner grew up hearing milkmaids talk about how catching cowpox, a mild disease transmitted from cows, protected them from smallpox. "I cannot take the smallpox," they'd say, "for I have had the cowpox." Country folk accepted this as common knowledge, but the medical establishment dismissed it as rural superstition. But Jenner couldn't dismiss it. He was trained in the latest medical science, having studied under John Hunter, one of the greatest surgeons of the age. Hunter had taught him to observe carefully, experiment methodically, and trust evidence over theory. "Don't think, try," Hunter would say. So Jenner observed. He noted that milkmaids who'd had cowpox seemed immune to smallpox during epidemics. He examined people who'd had cowpox and noted the characteristic lesions on their hands. He documented case after case, building evidence. But observation wasn't enough. To prove his hypothesis, he needed to perform an experiment that was, by any standard, ethically questionable. He needed to deliberately infect someone with cowpox, then expose them to smallpox and see if they became ill. This is where young James Phipps enters history. The son of Jenner's gardener, James probably doesn't fully understand what's happening. Jenner extracts pus from a cowpox blister on the hand of a milkmaid named Sarah Nelmes. Using his lancet, he makes small cuts in James's arm and applies the infected material. Imagine being in that room. The boy's fear, his parents' anxiety, Jenner's tension, knowing his entire hypothesis rests on this moment. If he's wrong, if cowpox doesn't provide protection, he's just infected a child with one disease and is about to expose him to another, potentially fatal one. James develops mild symptoms. A fever, some discomfort, a few lesions at the inoculation site, then he recovers completely. So far, as expected. Cowpox is generally mild. Now comes the truly terrifying part. 6 weeks later, Jenner exposes James to smallpox. He inoculates the boy with matter from a smallpox pustule, the same process that, in an unprotected person, would typically produce smallpox. James doesn't develop smallpox. No fever, no pustules, no illness. He's immune. Jenner performs the same experiment multiple times over the following months, exposing James to smallpox again and again. Each time, the boy remains healthy. The cowpox infection has provided complete protection against smallpox. You might expect celebration, parades, instant adoption. The discoverer of a method to prevent one of humanity's deadliest diseases should be hailed as a hero, right? Instead, Jenner faces ridicule, skepticism, and active resistance. The medical establishment attacks him. Physicians point out that Jenner hasn't explained how vaccination works. He can't articulate the mechanism by which cowpox provides protection against smallpox. And he's right. He can't. Germ theory doesn't exist yet. Viruses won't be discovered for another century. Jenner is working purely from empirical observation. It works, but he doesn't know why. Without a theoretical framework, many doctors reject vaccination as unscientific, even as folk superstition dressed up in medical language. Some propose alternative explanations. Maybe the milkmaids weren't actually protected. Maybe they just weren't exposed to smallpox. Maybe cowpox and smallpox are the same disease. The fact that Jenner's evidence clearly contradicts these alternative explanations doesn't stop people from proposing them. Religious objections emerge. Clergymen denounce vaccination as interfering with God's will. If God sends smallpox, they argue, who are we to prevent it? Some suggest that using material from animals to prevent human disease violates natural law or divine order. Sermons condemn Jenner as impious. Political cartoonists have a field day. James Gilray, the era's most famous satirist, publishes a cartoon showing vaccinated people sprouting cow parts from their bodies. The image of humans transforming into cattle becomes a powerful piece of anti-vaccination propaganda. People who might have considered vaccination see these images and recoil. Parents worry about the procedure. You're going to cut my child and deliberately infect them with a disease from an animal. Even though cowpox is mild, the concept seems unnatural, frightening, and there are legitimate concerns. Early vaccination isn't standardized. Some practitioners use contaminated material, leading to infections. Some use too much material or apply it improperly, causing complications. Economic interests align against vaccination. Inoculation, the previous method of smallpox prevention, is a lucrative business. Practitioners charge high fees to inoculate patients with actual smallpox, then isolate them for weeks while they develop mild cases. It's risky, patients can die, and they can spread smallpox to others during treatment, but it's profitable. These inoculators see vaccination as a threat to their income and lobby against it. Yet slowly, methodically, vaccination spreads. Not because of government mandates or military enforcement, not because Jenner convinces everyone through rhetoric, but because of one undeniable fact. It works. Doctors who try vaccination see the results. Parents whose children are vaccinated watch them survive smallpox epidemics that kill unvaccinated children. Communities that adopt vaccination see death rates plummet. Evidence accumulates. Impossible to deny. Benjamin Waterhouse brings vaccination to America in 1800. Thomas Jefferson vaccinates his entire family and promotes the practice. In 1805, Napoleon Bonaparte orders his army vaccinated, calling Jenner's discovery too important to be refused. Gradually, nation after nation adopts vaccination programs. The impact is staggering. In the 18th century, before vaccination, smallpox killed an estimated 400,000 Europeans annually. By the mid-19th century, after widespread vaccination, deaths plummet by more than 90% in countries with active vaccination programs. But the real miracle comes later. In 1967, the World Health Organization launches a global campaign to eradicate smallpox entirely through systematic vaccination. It seems impossibly ambitious. Smallpox exists on every continent. Many countries lack basic health infrastructure. How can you vaccinate everyone on Earth? The campaign uses a clever strategy called ring vaccination. Instead of trying to vaccinate everyone everywhere, health workers identify outbreaks, then vaccinate everyone in the surrounding area, creating a ring of immunity that prevents spread. Mobile teams travel to remote villages, often encountering people who've never seen modern medicine. They show before and after photos of smallpox victims and vaccination sites, building trust through visual evidence. The campaign faces enormous challenges: political instability, religious resistance, logistical nightmares, and limited resources. Health workers risk their lives traveling to war zones and remote areas. Many contract diseases themselves. Some die in accidents or attacks. But they persist. In 1975, 3-year-old Rahima Banu in Bangladesh becomes the last person to contract naturally occurring variola major, the severe form of smallpox. In 1977, Ali Mau Marlene in Somalia becomes the last person to contract naturally occurring smallpox of any form. On May 8, 1980, the World Health Assembly declares smallpox eradicated, completely eliminated from Earth. And disease that had killed an estimated 300 million people in the 20th century alone simply ceased to exist in nature. Think about what this means. Smallpox killed more people than both world wars combined. It killed more people than the Black Death. It killed more people than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined over equivalent time periods. And humans eliminated it. Not through military might, but through systematic application of a simple medical procedure discovered by a country doctor who couldn't even explain how it worked. By 1980, less than 2 centuries after Jenner's experiment, smallpox became the first disease completely eradicated from Earth. An illness that had killed an estimated 300 million people in the 20th century alone simply ceased to exist. No army ever achieved a victory of such magnitude. No general ever saved so many lives. The total number of lives saved by vaccination, directly and indirectly, probably exceeds 1 billion. People. That's not an exaggeration. 1 billion individuals who would have died of smallpox lived instead because of Jenner's discovery and the countless health workers who implemented vaccination programs. And the principle extends beyond smallpox. Jenner established that weakened or related pathogens can train the immune system to fight diseases. This principle leads to vaccines for diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, and dozens of other diseases. Vaccination becomes one of the most successful public health interventions in history, saving millions of lives annually. As you watch Dr. Jenner clean his instruments in that cottage in 1796, unaware that his work would eventually save more than 500 million lives, you understand that some of history's greatest heroes never wore uniforms or commanded troops. They wore spectacles and worked in obscurity, fighting enemies invisible to the naked eye. The real courage isn't always found on battlefields. Sometimes it's found in the willingness to challenge conventional wisdom, to trust evidence over authority, to risk ridicule and career for an idea you believe is true. Jenner showed that kind of courage. So did the health workers who, nearly 2 centuries later, completed his mission by eliminating smallpox from Earth. No monuments commemorate the smallpox eradication campaign in most cities. No national holidays celebrate its completion. Yet it represents one of humanity's greatest achievements, a triumph of science, organization, and collective will that literally reshaped the human condition. Let's shift to 1439, in Mainz, Germany. You're standing in Johannes Gutenberg's workshop. The space is cluttered, chaotic, filled with the smell of metal, ink, and oil. Gutenberg, a goldsmith and entrepreneur in his early 40s, is working on something that will change the world more profoundly than any military campaign of his era. But first, let's understand what he's trying to solve. In 1439, books are impossibly rare and expensive. Every single book must be copied by hand, letter by letter, page by page. A skilled scribe might produce 4 pages of text per day if working at full speed. A single copy of the Bible requires about 1,200 pages of text, meaning a scribe needs roughly 300 working days to complete one copy. And that's just the writing. The parchment itself costs a fortune. A Bible requires the skins of about 200 sheep or calves. The inks must be mixed by hand. Illustrations, if included, add months more work. A completed Bible might cost the equivalent of a farm or 3 years' wages for a laborer. The result: books are luxury items owned almost exclusively by churches, monasteries, and the wealthiest nobility. A monastery might possess a library of 50 books and consider itself well-stocked. Universities have a few hundred books total, chained to desks to prevent theft. The idea of a personal library, of ordinary people owning books, is as absurd as suggesting they might own their own castle. This scarcity means knowledge is controlled. The church decides which texts are copied and preserved. Royal courts determine which histories are recorded. The written word is power, and only the powerful have access to it. Gutenberg is trying to change this, though he probably doesn't fully grasp the implications of what he's developing. He's a businessman facing financial problems, looking for a profitable innovation. His genius lies in combining several existing technologies in a new way. The Chinese have had woodblock printing for centuries, but it's impractical for European languages. Each page requires carving an entire block of wood, which is time-consuming and can't be reused for different texts. Gutenberg's insight is movable type, individual letters that can be arranged, used to print, then rearranged for different pages. But creating durable, precise movable type presents enormous technical challenges. Gutenberg is a goldsmith, skilled in metalworking. He develops a special alloy of lead, tin, and antimony that melts at low temperatures but produces sharp, durable type. He creates molds that allow rapid production of identical letters. Each letter must be exactly the same height and width, or the printed text will be uneven and illegible. Then there's ink. Traditional ink, designed for quills on parchment, doesn't work with metal type. It's too thin, too watery. It runs and smears. Gutenberg experiments with oil-based inks, adapting formulas from painters. After years of trial and error, he develops an ink thick enough to adhere to metal type, but fluid enough to transfer cleanly to paper. The press itself is adapted from wine presses common in the Rhine region. Gutenberg modifies the design to apply even, consistent pressure across a page. Too much pressure damages the type or tears the paper. Too little produces faint, unreadable text. Around you in the workshop, you see the components of this revolution. Thousands of individual letters cast in metal. Compositors arranging type letter by letter into frames. The press itself, modified from a wine press. Containers of ink. Stacks of paper imported from Italy because European paper production is still limited. The work is painstaking. Compositors must set type backwards so it prints correctly. They must justify margins, insert spaces, and catch errors before printing. A single page might take hours to set up. But once set, that page can be printed hundreds of times in the time a scribe takes to copy it once. Gutenberg's first major project is the 42-line Bible, named for the number of lines per page. It's a massive undertaking requiring years of work and significant financial investment. Gutenberg borrows money, recruits skilled workers, and obsesses over every detail. The result is extraordinary. The Gutenberg Bible is beautiful enough to compete with hand-copied manuscripts. Many contemporaries initially can't tell it's printed rather than written. Some copies are illuminated by hand after printing, with decorated initial letters and margins filled with artwork. These books satisfy the aesthetic expectations of wealthy buyers while being produced far more efficiently than hand copying. By 1455, Gutenberg completes about 180 copies of his Bible. This seems like a small number, but consider what it represents. It's more Bibles than most monasteries possessed in their entire libraries. It represents maybe 50 person-years of scribal work, completed in a fraction of that time. But you're witnessing more than just the production of books. You're seeing the birth of mass production itself, the first time identical products are created in quantity using mechanized processes. The principles Gutenberg pioneers, standardization, mechanization, division of labor, will eventually transform all manufacturing. The immediate impact on book production is dramatic. Before Gutenberg, Europe produced perhaps a few thousand books per year, all hand-copied. 50 years after his innovation, print shops across Europe are producing more than 10 million books. That's not a typo. Production increases by a factor of thousands within half a century. This explosion of available text transforms European society in ways impossible to overstate. Let's trace some of the consequences. First, literacy begins its long climb from rare skill to common expectation. When books are scarce and expensive, teaching people to read makes little sense. What would they read? But as books become available and affordable, literacy becomes valuable. Parents want their children to read. Merchants need literate employees. The percentage of Europeans who can read begins a steady climb that continues for centuries. Second, knowledge begins spreading rapidly beyond traditional centers. Before printing, if you wanted to learn advanced mathematics, you needed access to one of the handful of universities or monasteries with mathematical texts. After printing, those texts spread to hundreds of locations. A curious person in a small town might now access knowledge previously available only in Paris, Oxford, or Bologna. Third, the standardization of texts reduces errors that accumulated through hand copying. Scribes made mistakes. They misread words, skipped lines, introduced errors that subsequent scribes copied. With printing, one careful review of the type ensures that all copies are identical. Scientific knowledge, legal codes, religious texts all benefit from this standardization. Fourth, new forms of literature become viable. Before printing, producing 100 copies of a pamphlet or broadsheet was impossible for practical purposes. After printing, pamphlets become a major form of communication. Political pamphlets, news sheets, satirical broadsides all flourish. Public opinion becomes a force in politics because printed materials can spread ideas to wide audiences quickly. The Protestant Reformation, beginning in 1517, demonstrates printing's revolutionary power. When Martin Luther posts his 95 theses criticizing church practices, they're printed and distributed across Germany within weeks. Previously, such a document might have circulated in a few copies among clergy and scholars. But printing transforms Luther's theological argument into a public phenomenon. Luther, recognizing printing's power, writes prolifically. He translates the Bible into German, making scripture accessible to ordinary people for the first time. Between 1518 and 1525, an estimated 6 million pamphlets circulate in Germany, about a third written by Luther. The church tries to suppress his writings, but can't. Print shops produce copies faster than authorities can seize them. The Reformation succeeds not just because of theological arguments or political circumstances, but because printing allows rapid, wide distribution of ideas that challenge church authority. Without printing presses, Luther likely becomes a footnote in history, one more dissident cleric suppressed by church authorities. The scientific revolution similarly depends on printing. Copernicus publishes his heliocentric theory. Vesalius publishes detailed anatomical drawings. Galileo publishes observations contradicting Aristotelian physics. Each publication builds on earlier work, made accessible through printing. Scientists across Europe can read each other's findings, replicate experiments, identify errors, and advance knowledge collectively rather than working in isolation. Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, published in 1687, synthesizes and extends the work of dozens of earlier scientists. Newton builds on Galileo, Kepler, Descartes, and many others. He can do this because their work is available in print. Without printing, Newton might never encounter their ideas, and his revolutionary synthesis of physics and mathematics might never occur. The Enlightenment, that intellectual movement emphasizing reason, science, and individual liberty spreads through printed books and pamphlets. Locke, Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, their ideas reach educated people across Europe and eventually across oceans to colonial America. The American and French revolutions are partly inspired by Enlightenment ideas accessible because they're printed and widely distributed. Standing in Gutenberg's workshop in 1439, watching the press produce identical pages, you're witnessing the beginning of all this. The Protestant Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, the spread of literacy, the democratization of knowledge, it all starts here, with a financially struggling goldsmith who figured out how to cast durable type and print books efficiently. Gutenberg himself doesn't get rich. He borrows money to fund his operation and eventually loses control of his workshop to his creditor, Johann Fust. He dies in relative obscurity in 1468. But his invention outlives him by centuries and transforms civilization more profoundly than the work of any king or general of his era. As you hold a fresh sheet printed with sharp, clear letters, you realize you're touching a technology that will topple monarchies, challenge religions, advance science, spread literacy, and empower ordinary people in ways no army ever could. The printed word is a weapon more powerful than any sword ever forged, though it never draws blood. Well, that's not entirely true. Ideas spread through printing will inspire revolutions, wars, and conflicts. But they'll also spread knowledge that saves lives, ideas that reduce suffering, and information that empowers people to make better decisions. The printing press doesn't determine whether ideas are good or evil, liberating or oppressive. It simply ensures that ideas, whatever they are, can spread beyond the control of authorities who previously monopolized written knowledge. That's what makes it revolutionary. Not the mechanical innovation itself, though that's impressive, but the social and intellectual transformation it enables. Knowledge becomes harder to control. Authority becomes easier to challenge. Ordinary people gain tools previously reserved for elites. The world becomes more democratic, more dynamic, more dangerous, and more free. And it all starts here, in a cluttered workshop in Mainz, with a goldsmith who just wanted to find a more efficient way to produce books. Let's jump to 1928, in a cluttered London laboratory at St. Mary's Hospital. Alexander Fleming has just returned from a 2-week vacation in Scotland. He's a bacteriologist, studying infectious bacteria, and like most researchers of his era, he grows bacteria in petri dishes to observe their behavior. Fleming is not particularly organized. His laboratory is famously messy, with stacks of petri dishes, papers scattered everywhere, and experiments left out for days or weeks. Colleagues joke about the chaos, but Fleming defends his methods. Sometimes, he argues, messiness leads to unexpected discoveries. This is one of those times. Fleming is examining petri dishes he left out before her vacation. Most are contaminated, spoiled by exposure to air while he was away. Most scientists would simply curse and throw them away, annoyed at having to restart experiments. But Fleming is more observant than most. He notices something extraordinary. One dish contains a colony of mold, probably Penicillium notatum, though Fleming doesn't know the exact species yet. That's not unusual. Mold spores are everywhere, and laboratory cultures often get contaminated. What catches Fleming's attention is the area around the mold. The bacteria, Staphylococcus, which should be growing densely across the dish, are absent. There's a clear zone around the mold where no bacteria grow. Something about the mold is killing the bacteria. Fleming is intrigued. He's been searching for antibacterial substances for years. During World War I, he served in the Royal Army Medical Corps and witnessed countless soldiers die not from their wounds directly, but from bacterial infections in those wounds. He saw how antiseptics like carbolic acid, while killing bacteria, also damaged human tissue, often making infections worse. Fleming has been looking for substances that kill bacteria without harming human cells. He discovered lysozyme in 1922, an antibacterial enzyme found in tears and mucus, but it only works against weak bacteria, not the dangerous ones causing most infections. This moldy petri dish might be different. Fleming begins investigating. He identifies the mold as Penicillium. He cultures it, growing pure samples. He discovers that the mold produces a substance that kills many types of dangerous bacteria: Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, Pneumococcus, and others responsible for wound infections, pneumonia, and septicemia. He calls this substance penicillin and publishes his findings in 1929. You'd expect excitement, immediate recognition of penicillin's potential. Instead, the paper is largely ignored. A few scientists express mild interest, but most of the medical community moves on to other topics. Why? Several reasons. First, Fleming can't purify penicillin. His methods produce crude extracts that lose potency quickly. Without stable, purified penicillin, he can't run proper tests or develop medical treatments. Second, Fleming's initial tests in animals are disappointing. Penicillin breaks down rapidly in the body. Maintaining therapeutic levels requires constant infusions, which isn't practical for treatment. Third, the medical community is skeptical about antibacterial substances in general. Many researchers tried developing such substances in the early 1900s, and most efforts failed. The prevailing view is that chemicals powerful enough to kill bacteria are too toxic for human use. Fleming's claim that penicillin kills bacteria without harming human cells seems unlikely. Finally, Fleming isn't a great communicator. He's soft-spoken, shy, and not particularly good at promoting his research. His 1929 paper is technical and understated, failing to convey penicillin's revolutionary potential. So, penicillin sits on a shelf, literally and figuratively, for more than a decade. Fleming continues his research on other topics. The mold culture remains alive in his laboratory, occasionally used for experiments, but nobody is actively trying to develop it as a medicine. Then comes 1939 and the outbreak of World War II. In Oxford, a biochemist named Howard Florey and a chemist named Ernst Boris Chain are looking for research projects. Chain, reviewing scientific literature, comes across Fleming's paper on penicillin. Something about it intrigues him. Florey agrees it's worth investigating. They face the same problems Fleming did, purifying penicillin and producing it in useful quantities. But Florey and Chain have resources Fleming lacked. They have a team of researchers, including Norman Heatley, a brilliant biochemist who develops purification methods. They have funding from the Rockefeller Foundation. And they have motivation as war casualties mount, antibacterial medicines become increasingly urgent. The team works frantically. Penicillin is incredibly difficult to produce. The mold grows slowly and produces tiny quantities. They need hundreds of liters of mold culture to extract useful amounts of penicillin. Their laboratory becomes a penicillin factory, with every available container used to grow mold cultures. They develop clever techniques. They grow mold in bedpans and every other container they can find. They develop freeze-drying methods to concentrate penicillin. They solve the purification problem that defeated Fleming, creating penicillin pure enough for medical use. By 1940, they're ready for animal tests. They infect mice with deadly doses of streptococcus, then treat half with penicillin and leave half untreated as controls. The results are stunning. The untreated mice die within hours. The treated mice survive and recover completely. The first human test comes in 1941. Albert Alexander, a policeman, has scratched his face on a rose thorn. The scratch became infected, and the infection spread. By the time he reaches the hospital, he's dying of septicemia. Abscesses cover his face and scalp. His temperature is 105 degrees. He's delirious. Florey administers penicillin. The effect is dramatic. Within 24 hours, Alexander's fever drops. His abscesses begin healing. He becomes coherent. It seems like a miracle. But there's a problem. The Oxford team doesn't have enough penicillin. They've used their entire supply treating Alexander. They even collect his urine and extract penicillin from it for reuse. But it's not enough. After 5 days of treatment, the penicillin runs out. The infection returns. Albert Alexander dies. The team is devastated. They've proven penicillin works in humans, but they can't produce enough to complete treatment. They need industrial-scale production, which requires resources and expertise beyond their laboratory. Florey travels to the United States seeking help. American pharmaceutical companies are skeptical at first. Penicillin production seems too difficult, too expensive. But the US government, recognizing penicillin's potential military value, pressures companies to try. The breakthrough comes from an unexpected source. Mary Hunt, a laboratory technician in Peoria, Illinois, is tasked with finding penicillium strains that produce more penicillin than Fleming's original strain. She searches through samples from various sources. One day, she brings in a moldy cantaloupe from a local fruit market. The mold on that cantaloupe, Penicillium chrysogenum, produces 200 times more penicillin than Fleming's original Penicillium notatum. Further mutations and selective breeding increase production even more. Combined with new fermentation techniques using corn steep liquor, companies can finally produce penicillin in useful quantities. By D-Day in 1944, American and British factories are producing enough penicillin to treat all Allied wounded. Soldiers who would have died of infected wounds survive. The mortality rate from bacterial infections drops dramatically. But penicillin's real impact comes after the war, when mass production makes it widely available for civilian use. Suddenly, diseases that had haunted humanity for millennia become treatable. Before penicillin, a simple cut could kill you. If bacteria entered the wound and infection developed, doctors had few options. They might try antiseptics, which often damaged tissue more than they helped. They might amputate if infection spread to a limb. Often, they could only watch as patients died from septicemia or gangrene. Pneumonia, called the Captain of the Men of Death by William Osler, killed hundreds of thousands annually. Young, healthy people could develop pneumonia and die within days. Hospitals had pneumonia wards filled with dying patients. Families watched helplessly as loved ones struggled to breathe, their lungs filled with fluid and bacteria. Scarlet fever, caused by streptococcus, could kill children in hours. One day, a child has a sore throat and fever. The next day, they're covered in a distinctive red rash, and a day later, they're dead. Parents lived in fear of scarlet fever epidemics. Syphilis, sexually transmitted but also passed from mother to child, caused progressive debilitation. In its late stages, it attacks the nervous system, causing madness and paralysis. Treatments before penicillin involved mercury or arsenic compounds that were almost as dangerous as the disease. Many patients died from the treatment rather than the disease. Penicillin transforms all of this. Infected wounds heal quickly with a few days of treatment. Pneumonia becomes a manageable illness rather than a death sentence. Scarlet fever loses its terror. Syphilis becomes curable with a course of injections. The impact on life expectancy is profound. In 1900, average life expectancy in the United States is about 47 years. By 1950, it's 68 years. Much of that gain comes from antibiotics reducing deaths from infectious diseases. By some estimates, antibiotics have saved over 200 million lives since their introduction. That's more than died in both world wars combined, in the Russian Civil War, in the Chinese Civil War, in all the conflicts of the 20th century combined. And those lives weren't just saved once. They went on to be lived, to have children, to contribute to society. Think about what this means for your own life. Without antibiotics, you probably wouldn't exist. Your parents or grandparents likely survived infections that would have killed them in an earlier era. You've probably taken antibiotics yourself for strep throat, ear infections, or other bacterial infections. Those illnesses, trivial with antibiotics, could have been fatal without them. As you stand in Fleming's laboratory, watching him examine that moldy petri dish, you're witnessing one of the most consequential observations in history. Fleming didn't invent anything. He didn't create penicillin, the mold did. He simply noticed something unusual and investigated. But that observation, followed by years of work by Fleming, Florey, Chain, and thousands of others, ultimately saved hundreds of millions of lives. No general ever achieved such a victory. No military campaign ever had such lasting positive impact. The war on infectious bacteria, fought with microscopes and petri dishes rather than tanks and bombers, changed human life more profoundly than any armed conflict in history. Fleming shared the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1945 with Florey and Chain. His acceptance speech is characteristically modest. He warns about antibiotic resistance, noting that bacteria exposed to sublethal doses of penicillin can develop resistance. It's a prescient warning. By the 21st century, antibiotic resistance will become a major medical challenge. But that shouldn't diminish the achievement. For decades, antibiotics gave humanity an unprecedented advantage in the ancient struggle against bacterial disease. Lives saved, suffering prevented, and human potential unleashed by the accidental discovery of a moldy cantaloupe in Peoria and a cluttered laboratory in London. This is how real revolutions happen. Not through planned campaigns and dramatic battles, but through observation, persistence, collaboration, and luck. Fleming's untidy lab habits let mold contaminate his cultures. His curiosity made him investigate rather than discard the contaminated dish. Florey and Chain's systematic research solved production problems. American industry's manufacturing prowess scaled up production. A laboratory technician's moldy fruit provided a better penicillin source. Each step seems small. None involves armies or conquest. Yet together, they represent a victory over enemies that had killed humans since our species emerged. The bacteria that turn minor wounds into fatal infections, that turn a winter cold into deadly pneumonia, that spread through communities leaving death in their wake. As you watch Fleming examine his contaminated dishes, you're witnessing the beginning of the antibiotic age, an era when bacterial diseases cease to be humanity's leading cause of death, when surgery becomes far safer, when minor injuries no longer carry death sentences. You're watching the start of a revolution that will ripple through the decades, saving lives at a scale no military leader could imagine, fought not with weapons but with observation, chemistry, and the fortunate accident of a messy laboratory. Now let's travel to 1960s Mexico. You're standing in a wheat field in the Yaqui Valley, squinting against the bright sun. The temperature is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The air shimmers with heat. Next to you stands Norman Borlaug, a 50-year-old American agronomist with weathered skin, wearing dusty work clothes. He's kneeling in the dirt, examining wheat stalks with the focused attention of someone who's spent decades studying every detail of this plant. This doesn't look like history being made. There are no cameras, no ceremony, no recognition, just a middle-aged scientist in a hot field doing what he's done nearly every day for the past 20 years, crossbreeding wheat varieties, testing resistances, measuring yields. It's hot, dusty, unglamorous work. But what Borlaug is developing here will save more lives than any general ever did. To understand what Borlaug is accomplishing, you need to understand the crisis he's trying to solve. In the 1960s, population growth is outpacing food production across much of the developing world. India, Pakistan, and other countries face catastrophic famines. Millions are starving. Many experts predict that hundreds of millions will die in the coming decades. The problem is that traditional agriculture can't feed rapidly growing populations. In places like India, farmers use methods unchanged for centuries. They plant traditional wheat varieties that yield relatively little grain. They use animal and human labor for plowing and harvesting, which limits acreage. They have limited access to fertilizers or irrigation. As populations grow, farmers try to expand cultivation to marginal lands, poor soils, steep hillsides, anywhere that might grow crops. But yields remain low. Every additional mouth to feed requires more land brought under cultivation, and good land is running out. The doomsayers seem to have mathematics on their side. Population is growing exponentially. Agricultural production is growing linearly. Eventually, inevitably, food production won't keep pace with population growth, and mass starvation will result. But Borlaug doesn't accept this fatalism. He believes it's possible to dramatically increase crop yields through scientific plant breeding. If he can develop wheat varieties that produce more grain per acre, that resist diseases, that respond well to fertilizers, then the same land can feed far more people. He's been working toward this goal since 1944, when the Rockefeller Foundation sent him to Mexico to help develop better wheat varieties. Mexico was importing half its wheat at the time. Borlaug's initial mandate was modest: help Mexico feed itself. 20 years later, he's exceeded that goal. Mexico is now self-sufficient in wheat production. But Borlaug hasn't stopped. He's developed wheat varieties with several revolutionary characteristics. First, they're disease-resistant. Traditional wheat varieties are vulnerable to stem rust, a fungal disease that can wipe out entire crops. Borlaug crossbreeds wheat with wild relatives, incorporating rust resistance genes. His varieties can withstand diseases that would devastate conventional crops. Second, they respond dramatically to fertilizers. Traditional wheat varieties, if given extra fertilizer, grow tall and then fall over, lodging the crop and making it impossible to harvest. Borlaug develops semi-dwarf varieties with shorter, stronger stems. These varieties put more energy into grain production and less into stalk growth. They can handle heavy fertilization without lodging. Third, they're photoperiod insensitive. Most wheat varieties are adapted to specific day lengths, growing well only in certain latitudes or seasons. Borlaug's varieties can grow across a wide range of latitudes, making them suitable for many different environments. The combination is revolutionary. In trials, Borlaug's wheat varieties produce 3 to 4 times more grain per acre than traditional varieties, given proper fertilization and irrigation. It's not a modest improvement, it's a transformation of agriculture's productivity. But developing the varieties is only the first step. Getting them adopted is harder. Borlaug faces skepticism from multiple directions. Traditional agricultural scientists think his approach is too simple. They want to understand all the genetic mechanisms before recommending new varieties. Borlaug argues there's no time for that. People are starving now. If the varieties work, use them and figure out the genetics later. Some environmentalists worry about the consequences of intensive agriculture. More fertilizer means more chemical runoff. Irrigation can deplete water resources and cause soil salinity. Monoculture crops might be vulnerable to new diseases. Borlaug acknowledges these concerns, but argues that the alternative, watching millions starve, is worse. Some political leaders in developing countries resist foreign agricultural advice. They see Borlaug's program as Western imperialism or capitalist exploitation. Borlaug, frustrated by these politics, focuses on demonstrating results. If farmers see their neighbors getting higher yields with new varieties, politics becomes less important. The breakthrough comes in 1963 when the Indian government, facing imminent famine, agrees to import Borlaug's wheat seeds. It's a desperate gamble. If the new varieties fail, the famine will be worse. But India has few options. Borlaug travels to India and encounters immediate obstacles. Infrastructure is poor. There aren't enough trucks to transport the seeds from ports to farms. At one point, Borlaug personally helps unload wheat seeds from ships because port workers are on strike. He bribes officials, navigates bureaucracy, and works 20-hour days to get seeds distributed to farmers. The 1965 planting season is chaotic. Farmers don't trust the new seeds. They plant them incorrectly or plant traditional varieties alongside as insurance. But some farmers follow Borlaug's recommendations. Plant the new varieties, apply adequate fertilizer, irrigate if possible. The results are stunning. Fields planted with Borlaug's wheat yield double or triple what traditional varieties produce. Farmers who see these results immediately want the new seeds. Demand explodes. By 1968, India and Pakistan are planting millions of acres with the new wheat varieties. Production increases dramatically. India's wheat harvest nearly doubles between 1965 and 1970. Pakistan experiences similar gains. The transformation is so rapid and dramatic that it's called the Green Revolution. Countries that were importing food become exporters. Famines that seemed inevitable don't happen. Millions of people who would have starved instead have enough to eat. The numbers are staggering. Borlaug's work is credited with saving over 1 billion people from starvation. 1 billion. That's more than the entire population of Europe and North America combined. It's more than all the people who died in all the wars of the 20th century combined. Think about what this means. If you know anyone from India, Pakistan, Mexico, or many other developing countries, they probably exist because of Borlaug's work. Their parents or grandparents likely survived because food was available when it otherwise wouldn't have been. Borlaug receives the Nobel Peace Prize in 1970, one of the few times the prize goes to someone for scientific achievement rather than diplomatic or political work. The Nobel Committee recognizes that preventing starvation is preventing conflict, that Borlaug's contribution to peace surpasses most diplomatic efforts. But the story doesn't end with celebration. The Green Revolution generates criticism and unintended consequences. Environmentalists point out that intensive agriculture damages ecosystems. Heavy fertilizer use pollutes water. Pesticides harm wildlife. Irrigation depletes aquifers and rivers. Single crop agriculture reduces biodiversity. These are legitimate concerns. Social critics note that the Green Revolution often benefits large farmers more than small ones. Access to fertilizers, irrigation, and credit favors those with capital. In some regions, the Green Revolution increases inequality, enriching some farmers while leaving others behind. Agricultural scientists warn about genetic uniformity. If millions of acres are planted with genetically similar wheat, a new disease could potentially wipe out entire harvests. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s happened partly because Ireland depended on a single potato variety vulnerable to blight. Borlaug acknowledges these issues, but defends his work. He argues that feeding people was the priority. Environmental concerns are important, he says, but they're luxury concerns for the well-fed. When people are starving, the immediate need for food overrides longer-term environmental considerations. He also points out that intensive agriculture on less land is environmentally preferable to extensive agriculture that converts forests and wildlands to cropland. If traditional farming continued, feeding growing populations would require clearing vast additional acreage, destroying far more ecosystems than intensive agriculture damages. On inequality, Borlaug notes that while the Green Revolution wasn't perfect, it provided food for hundreds of millions of poor people who would have starved under traditional agriculture. The fact that some people benefited more than others doesn't negate the benefit to those who survived. On genetic uniformity, Borlaug emphasizes the need for continuing research and development of new varieties. The Green Revolution wasn't a one-time fix, but an ongoing process of agricultural improvement. The debate continues decades after Borlaug's work. Some see him as a savior who prevented catastrophe. Others see him as initiating agricultural practices that create long-term problems. Both perspectives have merit. What's undeniable is the scale of Borlaug's impact. 1 billion lives saved. Famines prevented. Countries transformed from food importers to food exporters. Standards of living improved for hundreds of millions as food became affordable. As you stand in that wheat field in Mexico, Watching Borlaug examine wheat stalks with dirt under his fingernails and sweat staining his shirt, you realize you're seeing a different kind of hero. Not someone who defeated enemies, but someone who defeated hunger. Not someone who commanded armies, but someone who commanded knowledge of genetics, plant breeding, and agricultural systems. His weapon wasn't the sword or gun, but the crossbred seed. His battlefield wasn't Gettysburg or Normandy, but fields in Mexico, India, and Pakistan. His victory wasn't measured in territory conquered, but in lives saved, children fed, and futures made possible. No general ever achieved such a triumph. No military campaign ever had such lasting positive impact. Borlaug fought humanity's oldest enemy, hunger, and won battles that saved more lives than all the wars of the 20th century claimed. When Borlaug dies in 2009 at age 95, obituaries call him the man who saved 1 billion lives. It's not hyperbole. If anything, it might be an understatement, since the 1 billion people saved have had children, and those children have had children. The impact ripples forward through generations. Yet most people today couldn't pick Borlaug out of a lineup. His name doesn't appear in most history textbooks. He has no monuments in major cities. Children don't learn about him in school. The man who saved 1 billion lives lived in relative obscurity, known mainly to agricultural scientists and food policy experts. This is the history without battles. The history of achievement measured not in enemies killed, but in people saved. The history of courage measured not in facing bullets, but in facing skepticism, bureaucracy, and physical hardship to solve problems that matter. The history of heroes who wear work clothes and get their hands dirty rather than uniforms and medals. Borlaug's legacy continues. The agricultural techniques he pioneered, modified and improved by subsequent researchers, continue feeding billions. The International Maize and Wheat Improvement Center, CIMIT, he helped establish continues developing improved crop varieties. The principle that scientific agriculture can feed growing populations remains valid, even as we grapple with the environmental and social challenges it creates. As you watch Borlaug walk through fields of wheat, stopping occasionally to examine a stalk or make a note, you understand that real revolutions don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they happen in hot, dusty fields where patient scientists conduct unglamorous work that changes the world. Let's shift gears to 1969, but not to the moon landing everyone knows about. While that's happening, something equally revolutionary is occurring in a small room at UCLA. It's October 29th, 1969, about 10:30 p.m. A graduate student named Charlie Klein is sitting at a computer terminal, preparing to send the first message over ARPANET, the precursor to the Internet. The room is dominated by an interface message processor, or IMP, a refrigerator-sized computer that looks like something from a science fiction movie. It's one of only 4 such machines in existence. The others are at Stanford Research Institute, UC Santa Barbara, and the University of Utah. The goal tonight is to log into the computer at Stanford from the terminal at UCLA. Next to Klein is his supervisor, Leonard Kleinrock, a UCLA professor who's been working on packet switching theory. On the phone is Bill Duvall at Stanford, ready to confirm whether the login works. Klein types L. Got the L, Duvall confirms from Stanford. Klein types O. Got the O, Duvall says. Klein types G to complete log. The system crashes. The first internet message is literally LO, as if the computer is saying hello in the most abbreviated form possible, then giving up. It's a fitting beginning for a technology that will reshape human communication. Ambitious, promising, and immediately buggy. They get it working about an hour later, successfully establishing the first host-to-host connection. It's unremarkable to anyone watching. Two computers exchange data. No lives are saved, no money changes hands, nothing dramatic happens. Yet this moment is the beginning of something that will transform human civilization as profoundly as the printing press. But let's back up and understand what problem they're trying to solve. In 1969, computers are rare, expensive machines found only in universities, large corporations, and government agencies. Each computer is isolated. If researchers at UCLA want to use a program available only on a computer at Stanford, they can't access it remotely. They either travel to Stanford, or Stanford sends them punch cards or magnetic tapes by mail. It's slow, inefficient, and limits collaboration. The U.S. Department of Defense's Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, has been funding research into computer networking. The idea is to allow researchers to share computing resources without traveling or mailing data. It's primarily a practical concern, but the implications will prove far more significant than anyone imagines. The technical challenges are enormous. Different computers use incompatible systems. Getting them to communicate requires developing common protocols, agreed upon rules for how data is formatted and transmitted. The breakthrough insight is packet switching, developed independently by Paul Baran at Rand Corporation and Donald Davies in England. Instead of maintaining a continuous connection between two computers like a telephone call, packet switching breaks messages into small packets, each transmitted independently and reassembled at the destination. This seems inefficient. Why break a message into pieces? But packet switching has enormous advantages. If one route is busy or broken, packets can take alternative routes. The network can handle multiple messages simultaneously. It's resilient, surviving even if parts of the network fail. Leonard Kleinrock at UCLA has been working on the mathematical theory of packet switching. Larry Roberts at ARPA is coordinating the network's development. Bob Taylor, ARPA's Director of the Information Processing Techniques Office, has been championing the project. Dozens of engineers and computer scientists contribute. Frank Hart leads the team at Bolt, Baranek, and Newman that builds the interface message processors. Bob Kahn develops the protocol for connecting different networks. Vint Cerf works with Kahn to create TCP/IP, the fundamental protocol that will eventually run the Internet. The development is gradual. After UCLA and Stanford connect in October 1969, UC Santa Barbara and University of Utah join in November. By 1971, ARPANET links 15 sites. By 1973, 35 sites. Researchers develop applications like email, which quickly becomes the network's most popular use. Ray Tomlinson sends the first network email in 1971. He chooses the @ symbol to separate the username from the computer address, a convention that persists today. Nobody thinks email will become ubiquitous. It's just a convenient way for researchers to communicate. The network grows slowly through the 1970s and early 1980s, mostly connecting universities and research institutions. It's useful for academics, but most people have never heard of it. Computers are still rare, expensive, and difficult to use. The idea of ordinary people having computers at home seems as fanciful as everyone owning a helicopter. Several developments converge to change this. First, personal computers become affordable. The Apple II, Commodore 64, and IBM PC bring computing to homes and small businesses. By the mid-1980s, millions of people own computers, though most aren't connected to any network. Second, modems allow computers to communicate over telephone lines. Early modems are slow, transmitting data at speeds measured in bits per second that seem laughably slow today. But they work, and they're affordable. Third, online services emerge. CompuServe, Prodigy, and America Online provide email, chat rooms, and information to subscribers. These are isolated networks, not connected to the internet, but they demonstrate public interest in computer communication. Fourth, Tim Berners-Lee at CERN invents the World Wide Web in 1989. This is distinct from the internet itself. The internet is the infrastructure, the network of networks connecting computers. The web is an application running on the internet, using hypertext to link documents across the network. Berners-Lee's insight is elegant simplicity. Web pages are written in HTML, hypertext markup language, which anyone can learn. Pages are accessed using URLs, Uniform Resource Locators, that specify exactly where each page is located. Pages link to each other through hyperlinks, creating a web of interconnected information. Berners-Lee deliberately makes the web free and open. He doesn't patent the technology or try to profit from it. He simply publishes the specifications and encourages people to build on them. This openness is crucial to the web's explosive growth. The first web browser, World Wide Web, later renamed Nexus, is released in 1991. It's clunky and difficult to use. But in 1993, Mark Andreessen and Eric Bina at the National Center for Supercomputing Applications release Mosaic, a graphical web browser that's relatively easy to use. Suddenly, the web becomes accessible to non-technical users. The transformation is astonishingly rapid. In 1993, there are about 130 websites. By 1994, there are 2,738. By 1995, more than 23,500. By 1997, over 1 million. The growth is exponential. Businesses rush online. Amazon starts selling books in 1995. eBay launches the same year. Google is founded in 1998. By 2000, dot-com companies are everywhere, many with business models that make no sense but attract massive investment anyway. The dot-com bubble bursts in 2000, wiping out trillions in market value. Many internet companies collapse. Critics declare the internet a fad, overhyped, and underperforming. They're completely wrong. The internet isn't a fad. It's a fundamental transformation of human communication and commerce. After the bubble bursts, the internet continues growing and becoming more sophisticated. Social media emerges. Friendster launches in 2002, followed by MySpace in 2003 and Facebook in 2004. These platforms transform how people maintain relationships and share information. Twitter launches in 2006, creating a new form of public conversation. YouTube, started in 2005, makes video content universally accessible. Smartphones, particularly the iPhone released in 2007, put the internet in billions of pockets. The internet is no longer something you access from a desk. It's with you constantly. This mobility transforms the internet's role in daily life. By 2020, more than 4.5 billion people, more than half of humanity, are online. The internet enables instant global communication, connects buyers and sellers across continents, provides access to vast information resources, enables remote work and education, and fundamentally reshapes how humans interact with each other and their world. Think about what this means for your life. You probably use the internet dozens or hundreds of times daily, often without thinking about it. You communicate with friends and family. You search for information. You shop. You navigate. You entertain yourself. You work. Much of modern life depends on the internet. No war created the internet, though military funding helped develop it. No empire imposed it through conquest. It spread because people found it useful, because it solved problems, because it connected rather than divided. The internet's impact on human society is still unfolding. It's enabled movements for democracy and justice, but also tools for surveillance and oppression. It's spread knowledge, but also misinformation. It's connected people, but also enabled new forms of isolation. It's created enormous wealth, but also widened inequality. The internet is not inherently good or evil. It's a tool that amplifies human intentions, both noble and base. But its transformative power is undeniable. It represents a revolution in human communication more profound than anything since the printing press. As you watch that first LO appear on the screen in 1969, followed by a system crash, you're witnessing the beginning of a transformation that will make distance nearly meaningless. A teenager in rural Africa can access the same information as a professor at Harvard. Dissidents can coordinate resistance against dictatorships. Scientists can collaborate across continents in real time. Ordinary people can publish their thoughts to global audiences. The internet topples dictatorships not through violence, but through unstoppable information flow. It enables revolutions that happen not on battlefields, but in the spread of ideas and the coordination of action. It empowers individuals in ways that would have seemed magical to previous generations. No general commanded this revolution. No army enforced it. It emerged from the work of thousands of engineers, programmers, entrepreneurs, and users who built, improved, and adopted a technology that connected humanity in unprecedented ways. Standing in that UCLA computer room in 1969, watching engineers troubleshoot network connections, you're seeing the birth of the information age. It doesn't look revolutionary. It's just technicians solving technical problems. But this mundane work will reshape civilization more profoundly than most armed conflicts in history. The internet's story continues. New applications, new platforms, new ways of using networked communication emerge constantly. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, blockchain, quantum computing, each new technology builds on the foundation laid in that UCLA room when a graduate student typed LO and the system crashed. That's how revolutions happen in the modern age. Not with declarations and battles, but with innovations that solve problems and spread because they're useful. The internet revolution is ongoing, still transforming how humans live, work, and relate to each other. And it all traces back to a crashed connection and a determined group of researchers who kept trying until it worked. Let's travel back to ancient Mesopotamia, around 3400 BCE. You're in the city of Uruk, watching a scribe press a reed stylus into a clay tablet. This seems mundane, but you're witnessing the invention of writing itself. Before this moment, human knowledge died with individuals. A skilled craftsman's techniques vanished when he died. A healer's knowledge of plants lasted only as long as she could teach it directly to apprentices. Complex organizations beyond tribal size were nearly impossible because you couldn't reliably track who owed what to whom or communicate orders across distance. Writing changes everything. Knowledge becomes permanent. Laws can be recorded and enforced consistently. Contracts become binding across time. History begins because humans can now record what happened. Literature, philosophy, science, law, religion as we know them all become possible. No battle created writing, no war spread it. It emerged from the practical need to track grain stores and trade, then blossomed into something far more profound. It made civilization itself possible. As you watch the scribe carefully form cuneiform symbols representing grain quantities, you're seeing the foundation of everything that follows. Every book, every constitution, every scientific paper, every text message, all descend from these marks in clay. Let's jump to 1842 in Ada Lovelace's study in London. She's working on notes for Charles Babbage's analytical engine, a mechanical computer that will never be built in her lifetime. In these notes, she writes what is essentially the first computer program, an algorithm for calculating Bernoulli numbers. More importantly, she envisions something no one else sees, that machines could manipulate symbols according to rules and might therefore do more than just calculate. She imagines machines composing music, creating graphics, and advancing science. She's describing modern computing a century before it exists. Lovelace dies at 36, her vision unrealized. But her insights lay dormant until the computer age, when pioneers rediscover her notes and recognize her genius. Today, she's celebrated as the first computer programmer, the mother of an industry that defines modern life. No war taught her mathematics. No conquest gave her access to education. In fact, as a woman in Victorian England, she faced enormous barriers to learning. Yet her mind transcended those limitations, seeing possibilities invisible to others. As you watch her write, fascinated by mathematical patterns, you're witnessing the birth of an idea that will transform human civilization as profoundly as fire or the wheel. The idea that machines can think, or at least appear to think, that automation can extend beyond physical labor to mental work itself. Let's travel to 1903, on a cold, windy beach in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. You're watching Orville and Wilbur Wright, two bicycle mechanics with no formal engineering training, attempt to fly a heavier-than-air machine. Most experts say it's impossible. Samuel Langley, with far more funding and credentials, has just failed spectacularly days before. The Wright Flyer lifts off for 12 seconds, traveling 120 feet. It's shorter than the wingspan of a modern airliner. Yet, it's the moment humanity breaks free from Earth's surface through controlled, powered flight. Within decades, aircraft shrink the world. Journeys that took months by ship take hours by plane. During your lifetime, over 4 billion people will fly annually. Emergency medical supplies reach remote areas in hours instead of weeks. Global commerce accelerates dramatically. The Wright brothers achieved this not through war, though aircraft will tragically prove effective weapons, but through patient experimentation, careful observation, and persistent problem-solving. They studied birds, built wind tunnels, tested hundreds of wing designs, and learned from every failure. As you watch Orville pilot that first flight, barely clearing the ground, you're witnessing humanity's oldest dream realized. Not through magic or divine intervention, but through human ingenuity applied methodically to a seemingly impossible problem. Let's shift to 1928, again, but to a different discovery. Scottish bacteriologist Alexander Fleming has just discovered penicillin, but let's focus on a different, quiet revolution happening simultaneously. The work of Frederick Banting and Charles Best on insulin. Just 7 years earlier, in 1921, they isolated insulin and demonstrated it could treat diabetes. Before insulin, type 1 diabetes was a death sentence, usually within months of diagnosis. Children watched their bodies waste away as they starved despite eating, their cells unable to absorb glucose. The first child treated with insulin, 14-year-old Leonard Thompson, was near death when he received the injection. Within days, his blood sugar normalized. He lived another 13 years, dying from pneumonia rather than diabetes. Today, millions of people with diabetes live full lives because of insulin. The discovery won a Nobel Prize, but more importantly, it transformed what had been a fatal diagnosis into a manageable chronic condition. No army delivered this salvation. No general ordered this victory. Two researchers working in a university laboratory unlocked a secret of human metabolism and shared it with the world. As you stand in that laboratory, watching Banting and Best work with experimental animals, you're witnessing mercy more profound than any armistice. You're seeing human curiosity and compassion combined to defeat an ancient enemy of humanity. Let's travel to 1839 in Charles Goodyear's kitchen in Philadelphia. He's been obsessed for years with making rubber useful. Natural rubber becomes brittle in cold and melts in heat, making it impractical despite its obvious potential. Goodyear has tried hundreds of combinations, gone into debt, even faced prison for failure to pay creditors. His family thinks he's insane. Then, accidentally, he drops a mixture of rubber and sulfur on a hot stove. Instead of melting, it chars like leather. He's discovered vulcanization. This seems like a small thing, but vulcanized rubber makes possible. Tires for vehicles, electrical, insulation enabling power distribution, waterproof materials, gaskets and seals for engines, medical equipment, and countless other applications. Modern industrial civilization literally rolls on Goodyear's discovery. He dies $200,000 in debt, never profiting from his invention. But his accidental discovery, born from obsessive persistence, enables technologies that transform daily life for billions. As you watch him examine that charred piece of rubber, realizing what he's found, you're witnessing a moment when human stubbornness in the face of repeated failure pays off spectacularly. No war taught him chemistry. No conquest funded his research. Just one man's refusal to accept failure, driven by vision of rubber's potential. Let's jump to 1947 in Bell Laboratories, New Jersey. John Bardeen, Walter Bratton, and William Shockley have just invented the transistor. It's a small device that can amplify or switch electronic signals. It seems technical, abstract, unimportant, but the transistor makes possible. Computers small enough to fit on desks, then laps, then pockets, telecommunications networks connecting the world, medical devices from pacemakers to MRI machines, space exploration, modern entertainment systems, and essentially all electronics that define contemporary life. The transistor enables the information age. It's arguably the most important invention of the 20th century, yet most people couldn't explain what it does or who invented it. No battles were fought over it, though its military applications proved crucial. It simply quietly enabled the modern world. As you watch the inventors test their device, seeing signals amplified without vacuum tubes for the first time, you're witnessing a watershed moment in human technological evolution. This thumbnail-sized device contains more potential to reshape civilization than all the military hardware ever manufactured. Let's travel to 1885 in Louis Pasteur's laboratory in Paris. A 9-year-old boy named Joseph Meister has just been bitten by a rabid dog. Before this moment, rabies is a death sentence, causing horrific symptoms as the virus attacks the brain. Pasteur has been developing a rabies vaccine, tested only on animals. Using it on a human is experimental, risky, and ethically questionable. But without it, Joseph will certainly die horribly. Pasteur administers a series of injections over several days. The boy survives. The rabies vaccine works. This success establishes the principle that weakened pathogens can train the immune system to fight diseases. It validates vaccination beyond smallpox and opens the door to vaccines for countless other diseases. Within decades, vaccines will prevent diphtheria, tetanus, whooping cough, polio, measles, mumps, rubella, and many others. Vaccination programs will become one of the most successful public health interventions in history, saving millions of lives annually. All traced back to this moment, when a desperate scientist takes a calculated risk on a dying boy. As you watch young Joseph receive his injections, knowing he'll survive and live to old age because of this treatment, you're witnessing courage of a different kind. Not the courage to face enemy bullets, but the courage to test an unproven treatment on a child when the alternative is certain death. Let's shift to 1928, but in a different context. You're in a hospital watching as one of the first blood transfusions saves a woman who would have bled to death in childbirth. Blood typing, discovered by Karl Landsteiner in 1901, made safe transfusions possible for the first time. Before blood types were understood, transfusions often killed patients through immune reactions. Once Landsteiner identified A, B, AB, and O blood groups, safe transfusions became routine. Today, blood transfusions save millions of lives annually in surgeries, accidents, combat, and medical treatments. Blood banks emerge, storing and distributing blood to where it's needed. The concept seems obvious now, but it required understanding immunology, developing anticoagulants, creating storage systems, and building logistical networks. None of this happened through warfare, though wars certainly demonstrated the desperate need. As you watch the woman's color return, her life saved by a pint of donated blood from a stranger, you're witnessing a profound form of human connection. Anonymous generosity flowing literally through veins, connecting people who will never meet in an act of biological solidarity. Let's travel to 1796 again, but to a different quiet revolution. Benjamin Thompson, Count Rumford, is conducting experiments on the nature of heat. The prevailing theory holds that heat is a fluid called caloric that flows from hot objects to cold ones. Rumford's experiments, boring cannons and observing how friction creates seemingly limitless heat, demonstrate that heat is actually motion at the molecular level. This insight leads to thermodynamics, the science of energy transformation that makes possible efficient engines, refrigeration, power generation, understanding of climate and weather, and essentially all modern energy technology. No one remembers Count Rumford today. But his curiosity-driven research laid foundations for technologies that define industrial civilization. The relationship between heat and work, between energy forms, these principles enable everything from your car engine to the power plant lighting your home. As you watch Rumford measure temperatures in his boring experiments, you're witnessing the kind of patient, systematic investigation that builds scientific understanding. Not dramatic breakthroughs, but careful measurement and logical inference, asking nature questions and listening to the answers. Let's jump to 1847 in Ignaz Semmelweis's obstetric clinic in Vienna. He's noticed something disturbing. Women attended by doctors die from puerperal fever at rates 3 times higher than women attended by midwives. The medical establishment blames miasmas or bad air. Semmelweis observes that doctors come directly from performing autopsies to delivering babies, while midwives don't handle corpses. He hypothesizes that doctors are carrying cadaverous particles on their hands. He institutes mandatory hand washing with chlorinated lime solution. The results are dramatic. Death rates plummet. You'd expect celebration, but instead, Semmelweis faces ridicule. Doctors are offended by the suggestion that they might be killing patients. The medical establishment rejects his findings. Germ theory hasn't been established yet, so his hypothesis seems irrational. Semmelweis dies in an asylum, his ideas unaccepted. Only later, after Pasteur and Koch prove germ theory, is he vindicated. But his simple intervention, hand washing, eventually saves countless millions of lives. It remains one of the most effective public health measures ever discovered. As you watch Semmelweis demonstrate hand washing to skeptical doctors, you're witnessing how truth doesn't always triumph easily. Sometimes the most profound insights face resistance precisely because they challenge established authority and beliefs. But eventually, undeniably, evidence wins. And billions benefit from one man's careful observation and logical inference. Let's travel to 1800 in Alessandro Volta's workshop in Italy. He's just invented the first electrical battery, the voltaic pile. It's simple, alternating discs of zinc and copper separated by cardboard soaked in brine. But it produces steady electrical current for the first time. This invention makes possible electrical telegraphy, enabling long-distance communication, electroplating and other industrial processes, the discovery of new elements through electrolysis, understanding of electrical phenomena, and eventually all battery-powered devices from flashlights to electric vehicles. Volta's curiosity-driven research unlocks a new form of stored energy. He's not trying to solve a practical problem or win a war. He's investigating electrical phenomena because they fascinate him. Yet his discovery enables technologies that reshape human civilization. As you watch electrical current flow through his pile of discs, you're seeing the birth of portable electrical power. This principle will eventually power everything from pacemakers keeping hearts beating to spacecraft exploring distant planets. Let's jump to 1928 in London. John Logie Baird is perfecting television, transmitting the first transatlantic television signal. Simultaneously, Philo Farnsworth in America is developing electronic television that will prove superior to Baird's mechanical system. Television seems like mere entertainment, but it becomes one of the most influential technologies in history. Spreading information globally and nearly instantaneously, creating shared cultural experiences across continents, documenting events as they happen, educating millions through educational programming, and fundamentally changing politics by bringing leaders into people's homes. For better and worse, television shapes modern consciousness. It enables propaganda but also exposes wrongdoing. It promotes consumerism but also spreads ideas and knowledge. It can trivialize or illuminate, depending on how it's used. As you watch fuzzy images appear on an early television screen, you're witnessing a technology that will reshape human attention and culture. No war created it, though it will prove powerful in warfare's information dimension. It spreads because people want to see distant events, to feel connected to a larger world. Let's travel to 1903, but to a different innovation. Mary Anderson patents the windshield wiper. She observed streetcar drivers struggling to see through rain and snow, stopping frequently to wipe windshields by hand. Her solution is simple. A lever inside the vehicle operates a rubber blade outside, clearing the window without stopping. Manufacturers initially reject it as unnecessary, but as automobiles proliferate, windshield wipers become essential safety equipment. This simple device prevents countless accidents, saving unknown numbers of lives. Anderson's innovation typifies how practical problem-solving by ordinary people drives progress. She wasn't a trained engineer or scientist. She simply observed a problem and designed a solution. Her contribution to transportation. Safety rivals any military advancement, yet she died in obscurity. As you watch Anderson demonstrate her invention, you realize that history's crucial innovations often come from unexpected sources. Not from elites or experts, but from anyone observant enough to notice problems and creative enough to imagine solutions. Let's shift to 1879, in Thomas Edison's laboratory in Menlo Park. After testing thousands of materials, he's finally created a practical incandescent light bulb that burns for 13 hours. It seems modest, but it's the beginning of electrical lighting. Before Edison's work building on contributions from dozens of other inventors, night meant darkness or expensive, dangerous candles and oil lamps. Electrical lighting extends productive hours, makes reading and work possible after dark, improves safety, and fundamentally changes human sleep patterns and social rhythms. The electrification of cities and eventually rural areas represents one of the most transformative infrastructure developments in history. It enables industrial production running day and night, extended education and leisure time, safer streets and homes, and fundamentally new ways of organizing human activity. As you watch that first sustained electrical glow, you're witnessing the literal illumination of the modern world. Darkness, which ruled half of every day throughout human history, is about to become optional for billions of people. Let's jump to 1609, in Galileo's workshop in Padua. He's built a telescope based on reports of a Dutch invention and pointed it at the night sky. What he sees revolutionizes humanity's understanding of the cosmos. Moons orbiting Jupiter prove that not everything circles Earth. Mountains on the moon show it's a world like Earth, not a perfect celestial sphere. The Milky Way resolves into countless stars. Venus shows phases like the moon, proving it orbits the sun. These observations support Copernican heliocentrism, the idea that Earth orbits the sun rather than vice versa. This insight demotes humanity from the center of creation and establishes that the universe is far larger and more complex than previously imagined. Galileo faces inquisition charges for his findings. Truth, it turns out, often threatens power. But eventually, undeniably, evidence prevails. The heliocentric model wins not through military conquest, but through the weight of observations and mathematical elegance. As you peer through Galileo's telescope, seeing Jupiter's moons for the first time, you're witnessing an expansion of human understanding more profound than any territorial conquest. The universe just grew infinitely larger, and humanity's place in it fundamentally changed. Let's travel to 1928, in Alexander Fleming's laboratory again. But let's focus on the broader context. The 1920s and subsequent decades see a cascade of medical breakthroughs. Vitamins identified and deficiency diseases understood, hormones like insulin and later cortisone isolated, the understanding of how enzymes catalyze biochemical reactions, and X-rays applied to medical diagnosis. Each discovery emerges from patient research in laboratories, not from battlefields. Each saves lives on scales. Military medicine rarely achieves except by treating wounds that military violence creates. The pattern repeats throughout the 20th century. Polio vaccine, organ transplantation, chemotherapy, antibiotics, medical imaging, minimally invasive surgery, each breakthrough represents years or decades of research by teams of scientists and physicians who never fired a shot in anger. As you watch researchers peering through microscopes, mixing chemicals, recording observations, you're witnessing the real heroes of human history. Not those who take lives efficiently, but those who preserve them persistently. Let's jump to 1947, in a very different context. You're watching Jackie Robinson take the field for the Brooklyn Dodgers, breaking baseball's color barrier. This seems like sports, not history. But Robinson's courage and dignity in the face of virulent racism helped change American attitudes toward racial integration. Television brought his achievements into millions of homes. White Americans who might never knowingly interact with a black person saw Robinson's skill, grace, and humanity. While integration required decades of struggle, courageous individuals, and legislative action, cultural shifts like Robinson's breakthrough prepared ground for legal change. No battles integrated baseball or America. Progress came through individuals willing to endure hatred and violence to demonstrate shared humanity. It came through court cases, not combat. Through moral witness, not military force. As you watch Robinson steal home, dignity intact despite the racial slurs screaming from the stands, you're witnessing a form of courage as profound as any battlefield bravery. The courage to face hatred with excellence, to respond to violence with achievement. Let's shift to 1928 one more time, but to examine the broader pattern. The 20th century's most consequential changes almost all occurred without warfare. The development of plastics, creating versatile, inexpensive materials, the Green Revolution, feeding billions, the Civil Rights Movement, advancing human dignity, the environmental movement, recognizing ecological limits, the Women's Rights Movement, expanding freedom and opportunity, the LGBTQ rights movement, challenging discrimination, and the digital revolution, connecting humanity. Each movement faced resistance, each required courage, but they succeeded not through military force, but through moral persuasion, technological innovation, legal challenges, and persistent organizing. They changed minds and systems, not through violence, but through demonstrating better ways of living and organizing society. As you survey the 20th century from this perspective, You realize that military history, while dramatic and well documented, actually shaped human life far less than technological innovation, medical advancement, social movements, and economic development. The battles textbooks emphasize often prove less consequential than the quiet work of scientists, inventors, activists, and ordinary people solving problems. Let's jump to the present moment. You're reading this script on a device powered by electricity, displaying text through liquid crystal technology or LED screens, connected to a global network through semiconductor-based computers, all made possible by innovations we've discussed and thousands more like them. Your life expectancy is double what it was a century ago, mostly due to medical advances. You have access to information that would have seemed miraculous to previous generations. You're connected to a global community that transcends geographical boundaries. You live with material abundance that medieval kings couldn't imagine. None of this came primarily from military conquest. It came from curiosity, compassion, problem-solving, and the accumulated effort of millions of people whose names you'll never know. The scientist discovering a principle of nature, the engineer designing a more efficient process, the entrepreneur organizing resources, the activist challenging injustice, the teacher transmitting knowledge, the parent raising children with values of empathy and curiosity. This is the real story of human progress. Not the rise and fall of empires, though that matters. Not the drama of battlefield courage, though that exists. But the patient, persistent work of people trying to understand the world, improve the human condition, and leave things better than they found them. As you reflect on this alternative history, you realize something profound. The future will be shaped not primarily by those wielding weapons, but by those wielding ideas, tools, compassion, and persistence. By those asking questions and seeking answers. By those refusing to accept suffering as inevitable. By those imagining better possibilities and working to realize them. The most important battles aren't fought with swords or guns. They're fought in laboratories against disease, in workshops against inefficiency and limitation, in courtrooms against injustice, in classrooms against ignorance, in communities against indifference. And unlike military victories, which often come at the cost of human lives and create new grievances, these victories benefit everyone. A cure for disease helps all who suffer from it. An efficient technology serves all who use it. A principle of justice applies to all who seek fairness. A new understanding of nature belongs to all humanity. This is history without battles or wars. It's less dramatic, perhaps, than military narratives. There are fewer heroic moments and clear victories. Progress is incremental, often invisible until you step back and compare eras. But it's more inspiring, ultimately, because it suggests that any of us might contribute. You don't need to be a general or king to matter in this history. You need curiosity, compassion, persistence, and willingness to work on problems that matter. The scientists whose names you don't know probably saved your life or the lives of people you love. The engineers whose work goes unnoticed make your daily conveniences possible. The activists who faced ridicule and worse expanded the freedom you enjoy. The inventors who died in obscurity created technologies you can't imagine living without. This is the true story of civilization. Not its battles, but its building. Not its wars, but its work. Not its destruction, but its creation. As you drift off to sleep tonight, Think about the millions of people across human history who contributed to the comfort, safety, knowledge, and opportunity you experience. Think about the problems they solved, the suffering they prevented, the possibilities they opened, and consider, what problem might you solve? What suffering might you prevent? What possibility might you open for future generations who won't know your name but will benefit from your work? That's the real challenge of history. Not to conquer territories, but to conquer ignorance, disease, injustice, and limitation. Not to dominate others, but to elevate humanity. The battle-free history surrounds you. It's in every vaccine, every light switch, every book, every tool, every right you exercise, every fact you know. It's the accumulated wisdom and work of countless people who chose creation over destruction, understanding over ignorance, compassion over indifference. This history has no monuments on battlefields, but it has something better: a world transformed, lives saved, possibilities expanded, and a future made brighter by those who believed that knowledge, creativity, and moral courage could change the world. They were right. And the story continues, written not by generals and politicians primarily, but by everyone who chooses to add light rather than heat, to build rather than destroy, to understand rather than assume, to care rather than ignore. That's history without battles or wars. And it's glorious.